I was just obsessed with immortality, and that brought me into the Egyptian Book of the Dead. I didn't really focus too much on love spells or money spells. What I liked was curses. And then I was communing with spirits. And I thought I had found the secret. I started growing in more power, and then I asked them what's the next step. And that's when they mentioned the destruction of innocence is what they called it. And I wanted nothing to do with it. That's when they wanted to end me because my condemnation was set. It was a for sure thing.
Hello and welcome back to the Almost False podcast, where I interview regular people with incredible stories. Today's story is very intense, and as the title suggests, it does get pretty dark, just so you know. It's a testimony of a man who used to be a Satan worshiper and almost lost his life because of it, both physically and metaphysically. It's a wild ride, but if you've been here before, you know that the stories never end the way that they begin. So let's dive in and hear Christian's story, starting with the moment he first realized that witchcraft was real.
The place that we were in, it was in the middle of nowhere, so far away from civilization. Like, our neighbors were so far away from us, so it was quite boring. I remember being bored a lot of the time, just nothing to do, just me, my mom, my sister. I didn't like my sister. I didn't like my mom for bringing us to this place where there's nobody, there's no fun, nothing to do, and I just spend a lot of time in nature. And that's when I started to look into Wicca. And the internet was a thing, but it was only like Google's Ask Jeeves and AOL. You would search something and you'd find practically nothing on the thing you're looking for. So I would go and I would visit the library. I would search for esoteric books, anything I could find. I looked into otherworldly religions. I read the Mahabharata, which is the Hindu religion, their book. I looked a little into Islam, but that kind of bored me. I didn't really like that. And I found some books on Wicca. And a lot of Wiccans deal with nature, deal with stones and crystals, particularly, is a big thing in Wicca. And I would spend my nights by the fire doing little light spells with Wicca. And some things would work, some things wouldn't. And I would just write down the things that would work and forget the parts that wouldn't work. And then I would build on to that. So it started with Wicca. And then I had always had an obsession with immortality. That was the thing on my mind. It's like, we live and we die. What's the purpose of all of this? If there's a way to be immortal, I want to know about it. And that brought me into the Egyptian Book of the Dead, other like Jainism, all sorts of different worldly religions that I searched through trying to find the answer. I mean, I even have a tattoo of the eye forest on my shoulder. I was just obsessed with immortality. So I kept searching more books and more books and more books until I had a giant stack of them. I would take all the information from it that I could gather, and I would start implementing them and making spells. And that's when I kind of gravitated towards witchcraft. So after Wicca came witchcraft. And that's when I started seeing spells actually working. Like, a few things in Wicca did work here and there, but not enough that it had an impact on me. But when I got into witchcraft, that's when things started working, and that's what made a big impact on my life at that time. So
Yeah, well, okay, that's quite a lot already. So you said that you moved at 10 from Toronto to Prince Edward Island, which is very remote. And Prince Edward Island in and of itself is kind of remote, but there's cities, but you were, in the remote part of Canada. And you were bitter to your mom for bringing you there. And you started looking into all these things. Did she ever know? Did you ever talk to anyone about that? Because you talked about Wicca and then witchcraft, and it seemed to be a very fast transition. Did anyone else know about it?
when I was into Wicca and starting to learn about witchcraft, I don't think she did. To be honest, like, a lot of time I was up late at night, looking at the stars, trying to find the right celestial pattern for certain spells that I was doing. She knew I was staying up late, would ask questions about that, but I don't think she knew about it because I just felt like I didn't have to share that with her. It was something that I was learning myself. And even if I would explain it or talk to her about it, I don't think she would have understood. It's possible she would try and stop it, if anything. So I kind of kept it hidden from her and my sister.
Okay. You mentioned Wicca. and I've heard about Wicca, but maybe not everyone's familiar with it. So can you explain, in general terms, what Wicca is, and then what kind of spells would you do in the beginning?
Um, I didn't spend a whole lot of time in Wicca. I just remember the spells a lot related to nature. I remember reading about white Wiccan magic and dark Wiccan magic, which it's all dark, to be honest with you. A lot of them had to do with stones, crystals, like blessing them in a certain way to draw either money to you, draw people to you that you want them to pay attention to you in a love sense, sexual wise. There was a lot of tree worship. There was a lot of fire worship. Like it's a lot of the elements were a big thing in Wicca. Uh, some of it is also a thing in witchcraft, but I found it was more so in Wicca. And with my love for nature at that time, I felt that that was a perfect balance. But I always wanted something more. This wasn't doing it for me. These little spells that sometimes they would work, sometimes they wouldn't, and it was unreliable. So there is something there with Wicca, but I wanted something more than that. So that's when I went straight into witchcraft and started searching out that realm of things.
Yeah, I've noticed that a lot, if not most people that get into witchcraft usually have a very fast progression from, milder things to very intense things. How was it for you? You said you didn't spend a whole lot of time in Wicca and you wanted more. How fast was the process of, changing from one thing to another? And how was the progression of the intensity of the spell and the darkness of it at the same time?
Um, I would say it was probably about a year, maybe a year and a half when I discovered Wicca and then went into witchcraft. Because I remember I was playing hockey and my mom had told me that you will get $2 for every assist that you have and $1 for every goal, which sounds weird because you'd think a goal is worth more money. But she said, no, an assist is as good as a goal. So when I would play hockey games, I would start using basic witchcraft spells that I started using. And, I would be getting assists, goals, left, right, and center. And, I was slowly becoming one of the top players on my team. And, that's when I noticed that witchcraft was kind of working. It's a real life application that it does work. And that also ties into one of my first money spells that I did. And I did the spell and I was walking in a mall in Summerside, Prince Edward Island, and I found a $5 bill on the ground and I picked it up. And to me, that was like the first time that's ever happened to me. The only other time I found money was a $2 bill in Toronto as a little kid. So I've never found money just lying there. And $5 was worth a little bit more than it is now, but it was still too weak. I wasn't satisfied with it. I'm like, if this is all money spells brings me, like $2 here, $4 on a hockey tournament, $5 bill walking around finding that. I didn't want that. What I was feeling inside me at that time, I was angry. I was mad at everybody. I hated my sister. I hated my mom. I hated any people at school. I hated most of my teammates on my hockey team. I was just a very angry individual. Like if you looked at me wrong walking down the road in town, I would come up to you and I would confront you. It really sucks looking back to see how I was as a person. But the more I got into witchcraft, I kind of had a hook there where I knew it was still real. That part of life was real. That I found some sort of secret, but I built off of that in a way that started it birthed itself as pure hatred. Um, so I didn't really focus too much on love spells or money spells. What I liked was curses. I used to have a saying, if I'm not going to put the swear word in there, but I used to say, if you mess with me, you mess with me times three. And that means like, if you did something wrong to me, I would do three times as worse back to you. And I would use witchcraft to do that. So I would purposely be nice to people. I would go out of my way to help people. Um, just so that when they turned against me or rubbed me the wrong way, then I had a reason to get back at them. It's like, okay, I was completely nice to you. I treated you like gold and you're going to do this to me. Boom, there's my reason. and then I'd instantly go into witchcraft and do a curse spell. Um, Not so much hexes, but curses were my thing because they were working. They worked and they worked well. And that's what I did for a long period of my teenage years, look for opportunities to curse somebody. I mean, that's the type of guy I was. It was not good.
And how old are we talking about? You said teenage years, but that's quite a long amount of time.
Yeah,
You started,
15, 16, 50, like 14 and a half, 15, 16 into 17. But at that range, I had gone into Satanism at that point. So witchcraft was always kind of a constant thing, but there was a separation from witchcraft to Satanism, if that makes sense.
yeah. So not a lot of people take witchcraft as far as you did, but there's a lot of people that have experiences with Ouija boards. And I know that you did quite a fair amount of that as well. Can you talk about your experiences with the Ouija board and what they were like?
Sure. So Ouija board was an interesting thing because as I got darker and darker into things, like I was taking pleasure in seeing, a person who was wrong to me last week getting deathly sick because of a sickness spell that I did on them, or somebody's parents having their marriage fail because they yelled at me when I was at a sleepover. There's so many instances that showed me that this was working, but there was an element to it where I needed more power. I was very selfish. I was prideful. I hated a lot of people. And that's kind of what got me into Satanism. And at that point, around like 17, 16, 17, that's when I started researching into Satanism. And when I was reading about Satanism, what I had ordered was the Satanic Bible. But to me, honestly, that wasn't what I was looking for. When I read it, I kind of thought it was a joke. Looking back at it, it's just a slick way to get people interested in Satanism by lying and saying, "Oh, this is good. We believe in good values. Treat everybody nice. Treat others like you want to be treated." It's a veil. It's just a hook that draws people into it. That's all it is. But the reality behind Satanism is a lot darker. And I was never a part of a coven. That was one thing. Like, I hated people, right? You couldn't get me to a coven. I don't want to be around other people. I just want to be by myself, and I want to do these spells which work. And I remember getting a Ouija board. I ordered a Ouija board, came in, I started playing with it myself. It didn't work right away, but after doing it a few weeks, it started to move. And that's when I was like, okay, finally, I have someone to talk to, and then it would move on its own. And then I was communing with spirits. They said that they were friends. That's how they always talk to you, especially if you're just getting into it. They always want to let you know that they're like your best friend. And then they'll feed you pride. Like, you're the only one, we've chosen you, even, where they appeal to your pride and ego. And I thought I had found the secret. Like I started calling myself a Satanist, but I'm not really sure if it was that. I was a worshiper of Satan and the devil, but I wasn't in a coven or anything like that. It was just me, the demons, and I knew Satan existed because demons talked about him. They said that he was a good man who still lives. So I never really talked to Satan, but I would talk to, like, his children, I guess, is what they were telling me they were. So they would help me in my further spells. They would tell me, no, you did this wrong. You need to do this at this specific time of the night, like between 3 and 4 in the morning. You need to do this on a lunar cycle. You need to do this on a blue moon day. You need to do this in the winter solstice. All of these tips. You need to use a pink candle instead of a white one. Um, you need to use intent, emotion, and a picture or a piece of DNA from someone for this spell. Like, that's another thing is, in a lot of witchcraft spells, they'll use either a picture of you or a piece of your hair or something from you. Like, say if you're drinking out of a pop can, I'll use this for an example, and they put it down on a table, like in a cafeteria or somewhere, I would grab that and I would take it home with me, and I would use that in a spell. And I was learning all of this from demons. So it wasn't just me making it up. The first part of witchcraft was me learning what works, what doesn't. The second part, when I was gravitating into Satanism, I was still doing witchcraft, but it was of a much darker nature, where demonic entities, as I know them now, were teaching me how to do them and how to get better at doing them.
I find interesting that you mentioned about DNA, and I don't necessarily know if that's what it is, but it just brought up something in my mind where people that are not too familiar with these things, they kind of think that, spells and curses are just like magic things that you send into the air and somehow something happens. But the more I've talked to people, and I think you would echo a similar sentiment, that curses is essentially you're assigning a demon to do a specific task. And so when you started talking to the demons, that's why they got so much more efficient, because you were communicating with them and they would actually go and do whatever curse. And DNA or a picture of the person, in my mind, and I don't know if this is how it works again, but in my mind, it's like it's helping the demon to recognize who the person that you're talking about actually is, so they actually go to the right person. So I did find that interesting. But you said that they were telling you to do things, and I'm wondering, did they ever tell you to do something that you're like, no, this is too far, I'm not going to do that?
Yeah. That's kind of when I stopped becoming a Satanist. I had talked to people all over the place when I would meet them in public, try to get them to believe in Satan, telling them that he was on the good side of things, he actually cared for you, and trying to draw them in. And I was also in a band at that time. It was a very worldly band, but I would sneak little bits of spells into my lyrics, which were veiled. Like, you couldn't really figure out what I was doing with my lyrics, but there were spells in my lyrics. Um, Basically, everything that I had to do was draw people away from the truth of things, which they never really explained to me. Like, I knew that Satanism, witchcraft, that worked. That was the secret that I found out, that everything about it is true and not too many people know about it. So, they're on their own. I got it. I know it. And that's what it's going to be. At no time did they ever tell me about God, like God is evil or something like that. Like, I've heard people say that, but at no time they spoke of God. And the more I got into it, the higher I started rising. It doesn't make sense, but the more power I felt, I guess is the way I could put it. I felt like I could do anything because, like you said, it was the demons who do it. Because I got really prideful once talking to the demons, and I said, whoever does this, I'll just smite them, or I'll do this. And it's like, no, not you, us. And I was like, oh, okay. So I started to understand it was them doing it through my command. I was giving them the orders to do it, but it wasn't me doing it. It was the demons themselves on my behalf that were doing it. So that kind of knocked my pride a little bit, but still, I thought I was in charge. I started growing in more power, and then I asked them, what's the next step? What do I do to get to a higher level? And that's when they mentioned the destruction of innocence, is what they called it, where that's where you get into um, abuse of children. And like I had mentioned before, my mom, she was a foster parent. So we had kids all the time. And even though I hated people, I still hated people, everyone, every kind, but I still didn't think that was right to steal a child's innocence in any possible way possible, whether it be sexually, whether it be spiritually, teaching them evil things, or even teaching them how to do darkness themselves, or, I mean, killing them. Like, I wouldn't even kill a rabbit. Like, I love nature, so that was a part of me. The only thing I would use for spells in that sense, because some were of sacrificial nature, I would use insects. Like, I would use an ant, or I'd use a beetle, or I'd use a bee. I would use these things, or sometimes many of them, so that I wouldn't have to use a cat or a dog. I know it sounds strange, but these things did work in place of those. And there was also, it was the children stuff, destruction of innocence, but there was also the death of love. And what that is murdering a family member or somebody that you love, the person that you love the most in your life, whether it be your daughter, your son, your mother, your father, or your grandparents. One of them must be killed as a sacrifice to obtain higher status. and to get more powerful demons to reside with you instead of the ones I was dealing with at that time, because other ones would come in from time to time. And that's when I started to know that there was a hierarchy in the demonic kingdom, which I didn't understand right away. But when I was in simple witchcraft, it was lower caste demons, I would say. And then they grew higher, especially the one that taught me about the destruction of innocence and the death of love. That's what I call them because that's what they told me. Like at this point in time, I was learning strictly on what they were telling me. I wasn't looking at other books. I found most books actually to be wrong. And I would see this is where they did it wrong. Oh, they did it at this time of night. Totally wrong. If he's a failure, like, how do you guys not know these things? And there was a certain sense of pride in that. But that's when I stopped becoming a Satanist, because I saw the end result and I wanted nothing to do with it. I thought that's pretty disgusting in all levels. Like, there's obviously got to be a way to gain higher power than doing any of these things, but that's how it was, especially from demons who claim that they're on the good side of things. And I started to kind of see the veil slipping from my eyes, and I started to see what they truly were. And they were just extremely evil, full of darkness, is basically what I was dealing with.
Hey, I'm pausing here just to let you know that if you want more details about this testimony, whether you want more context about what happened before, or you have questions that I didn't ask, then consider joining us on Locals. We put out a bunch of extra content there, like the extra footage, which is everything that happened before the story started, or the after show, which is what happened after, along with advice that our guests have for you. There's also whole other episodes that are not available anywhere else, so why don't you go check it out? It's free to join. You don't have anything to lose and have a whole lot to gain. It also helps us to remain independent and fight censorship, so if you're interested, the link will be in the description. You can head over there after the episode is done. All right, now let's get back in the story. There's so many interesting things that you mentioned, because this is exactly what I've heard from other people that engaged in, black magic. And I had a gentleman on the interview. He wasn't doing that, but it was someone that he knew and he had learned from people close to him. Betraying someone close to you, and they called it a Judas ritual, which you mentioned, and the destruction of innocence. Those words specifically were not used before in anyone that I've talked to, but it's a pattern that you see. And there's something, I don't want to go too far without actually asking this question, because you talked about putting spells into your lyrics when you're making songs.
Right.
I'm just curious, and maybe you don't have an answer, but would you be able to recognize if someone did that? Like, did you ever see songs maybe on the radio and you're like, this looks like there's something like that? Is there something there?
Oh, yes. I see a lot of it, especially in heavy metal, death metal. A lot of it are just strictly spells. But even a lot of pop songs, like I hear it in mainstream artists. I'm not going to really mention too many, but read their lyrics again. Hear what they're actually saying, because it's not all fluffy, nice, teeny boppy lyrics. These are actual spells that they're doing and putting in their songs. And because they're so famous, I mean, I question what they have done to get there. And the fact that I see obvious spells in their lyrics, I mean, I could just imagine. But yeah, I see it a lot.
Yeah, no, I believe you, and I've heard about it, but that's why I wanted to ask you the question as someone that actually did that. You definitely have a better idea than I would, and that people that don't know about this kind of stuff would. So let's go back to the demons, and when they told you the next step to gain more power was the destruction of innocence and destruction of love or whatever. You obviously refused that. You're like, no, I'm not going to do that. This is evil, and you recognize that this was evil. What happened after you rejected it?
Well, first they said the destruction of innocence and explained it. And I said I wasn't doing that. There's no way, you can't get me to do that. And I was like, there's got to be another way. And then that's when they said death of love. And so they explained that. So I was like, I'm not doing that either. So I just put it away. I got up. I remember I was like smoking a joint. I got really drunk that weekend, and I just kind of forgot about it, to be honest. This is during a time where I was becoming homeless too. I had moved with two friends to Halifax, Nova Scotia, and we were all homeless at this time. So I just focused my life on getting high, trying all sorts of drugs. I probably tried every single drug there is other than heroin, because I don't like needles. But, I've gone through crack cocaine, crystal meth, ecstasy, Dilaudid, morphine, weed all the time, every day, drinking all the time. And I just kind of went from doing Satanism, I guess, if you want to call it that, and doing works for the devil, preaching to people on the street about Satan, to purely distracting myself from all of it. Like just getting as high as I can, just forgetting about it completely. And that's the road I was in. There was only one other time after that I did commune with the demons, and I had forgot about that in my testimony, but it was me, these two guys, I won't name them, but we had invited a prostitute over to our house, and we played the Ouija board on her stomach as she laid there. She started like getting very uncomfortable, and we could see that. And we're just like, I remember my buddy right here. He's like, "We'll pay you more. We'll pay you more. Just stay there. Stay there." And she said, "No, my stomach hurts. My stomach hurts too much." And she got up and we put the board away, and we're like, okay. And then she just left. But then that to me was like, okay, I can't even use the Ouija board without someone getting hurt. So it kind of topped it off there. And I was like, I'm done with this, basically. I don't want anything to do with this. And I kind of just didn't want to do it anymore and stopped doing everything associated with witchcraft and Satanism.
Yeah, I think one of the lessons of your testimony, we're actually going to get to more of it, is that even though you had rejected Satanism and the demons, they did not leave you alone. It's not, that's not how it works. So can you talk about what happened in the years following that, following you, leaving Satanism? What happened in the years following?
Okay, so me and my friend Mike, I will mention his name because he comes up later in the story. We decided that we're done with being poor and broke and homeless, so we're going to move to Saskatchewan. We decided to hitchhike across Canada. So we got as far as, I think, Ottawa, and that's when his father paid for our bus ticket all the way to Saskatoon. So we got to Saskatoon, and we were jonesing pretty hard for drugs. We didn't know anybody. We were still new in the town, and we met this guy who was working at a 7-Eleven store. His name was Lloyd, and we said, "Hey, do you know any hookups?" And he got us hooked up with cocaine and weed, and we're like, great. So we started a friendship with him. He invited us over to his house. He had a girlfriend at that time named Jermaine, and we were buddies with them, and we started smoking weed with them and just being really friendly. And out of the blue, this is kind of where my testimony starts. Um, I was in my apartment with Mike, and there was another girl named Megan and another guy named Dell. He was sitting on the ground eating ice cream. Megan was eating her ice cream, and I was behind the door eating ice cream around the corner. And we hear this buzzer, and we weren't expecting anybody, so we're like, that's kind of strange. And I looked at Megan, and she's like, no, 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 no. And I'm like, there's no way she knows who this is. Like, why is she telling me no? Maybe she's just high and paranoid or something. But I was like, whatever. I buzz it, and they're like, hey, it's Lloyd and Jermaine. Can we come up for a couple smokes? And I'm like, sure. And buzz them in. She's like, no, no. And then she just gave up. And I'm like, what's the big deal? I'm like, it's just them. So went back to eating my ice cream on the ground. And that's when I hear the door open, shuts. I see Jermaine. She's walking right down the hallway to Mike's bedroom. They've never been to our apartment, so it was really strange that she even knew where his bedroom was. Maybe she thought it was mine. And she had a crowbar in her hand. And I thought that was strange. So she starts walking really fast to Mike's room. So I put my ice cream down. I start standing up. And that's when Lloyd comes right in front of me. And he pulls out this monkey wrench. It was like the biggest wrench I've ever seen. And he just hauls off, hits me right across the temple. I started seeing stars, and I was so confused. I was trying to get my bearings, but I didn't have enough time because he put the wrench around my head. And he kind of bent me over. So I kind of knew what he was trying to do. He was reaming over so that he could go back and like break my neck or something, do something really bad. He already smoked me in the head at this time. So I had grabbed onto the wrench and I jumped in the air as he went backwards because he's way bigger than me, way heavier. I knew I probably would have been toast if I didn't do that. So we go up in the air like that and I scream, Mike, Mike, goes up again. And I scream again, Mike, Mike. And it just kind of went like this a few times. Jermaine hears me. She starts running towards me and she punches me in the family jewels. She grabs onto them and puts one leg on my upper thigh, one leg on my other shin. And she's like trying to like pull them off, I guess. He had my neck like this, so I couldn't do anything. And she has my lower half like that. And that's when I said, if there's a God at all in this world, like if there's a God, please save me because I'm about to die. And that's when I remember not thinking about it. It just happened where my hand flew forward. It hit Jermaine in the face and her glasses flew off. So she can't really see that good with her glasses being off. And I knew that. So that's what kind of gave me a little bit of time because when I hit her and she fell down and she's looking for her glasses, that's when Lloyd, he got mad because I just hit his girlfriend in the face. So he lets go of my neck with the wrench and he turns around to face me. And as he faced me, oh, that's right. He did take a swing. I blocked it like that, and he hit me right there on the arm. And from there to my shoulder, it was all yellow and black and blue for the court report. They took pictures of it and showed it in court. But as soon as he did that, I came back and I just hit him. I hit him up against the wall and just 1-2 it, 1-2. And during the time I was a hockey player, I was also a boxer for 2 years. So I kind of knew how to defend myself. But at that time, I was still almost knocked out from the first time he hit me. Like I started seeing white dots. Like that's kind of you're almost knocked out at that point. And during this whole time, when I was punching him, everything was red. So I'm not sure what that was. It was like an orangey red, mostly orange, my whole vision. I don't know if that's from the hit or if it's something spiritual. I have no idea to this day. But when I started hitting him, he got knocked out. He fell onto the ground and dropped the wrench. And at that point, I remember I wanted to pick up that wrench so bad and just finish him off. I wanted to kill him. I had him on the ground. He was out. And just there's something that just stopped me. Like I couldn't, my brain wanted to do that, but I couldn't physically do it. So I just turned and ran out the door, and Jermaine's standing at the door with a crowbar, and she still tried to hit me one more time. And that's when Megan, her last name is Gabriel, which is pretty funny, but she grabbed the crowbar out of her hand and it almost hit me in the temple. And then I hear a loud bang behind me. I ran out the door, ran outside, and I was in my boxers too, by the way, the whole time. So I'm running down the street in Saskatoon. I go to the first house I see, I start knocking on the door. This guy comes out. He's also in his like pajamas or whatever it was, house coat, because this was like 5, 6 in the morning on Sunday, June 3rd, 2006. Because I guess I'll get to that later, but I was knocking on the door. He came out. I said, hey, 2 people broke into my house that just tried to kill me. Can you call 911? He said, yeah. He's like, but while we're waiting, he's like, come here. So we went back to his shed that he had, and he pulls out this hoe, like a garden hoe, and he had this other clawed stick. And he's like, let's go. Like this guy must have been a fighter, or he just is waiting for the day he could get into trouble with someone or something. But he was just right on. He wanted to go back and fight these people. And I mean, I didn't really want to, but I have this big guy with me. Sure, let's go back. So we went back. We start ringing the buzzer. Nothing. No answer. Ring it again. No answer. And he's like, I don't like this. And I was like, yeah, me neither. So I'm thinking in my head that Lloyd got back up and he just like killed everybody. That's what I was thinking happened, because surely somebody in that room would have answered the door, but nobody did. So we went back to his house with his wife, and we just waited around. Police didn't show up, but Mike and his dad, they showed up in a car, and I knew Mike was alive, so everything was good. I'm like, oh, thank God. And I was like, what did they do? And Mike was like, when he said he woke up, he heard a commotion in the living room. And when he woke up, he started to get up. That's when Jermaine put the crowbar in his face and said, if it wasn't for your dad, you'd be dead too. And he's like, what? And got up, and he said that they both ran out the door. And I guess they ran away back to their house. I'm not really sure. And when we went into Mike's dad's house, was the apartment below us across the hall. So we went in there and we waited for the police. Police showed up. He was in our living room and giving him the report of everything that happened. The phone started to ring, so we answered it, and Steve answered it, Mike's dad, and he's like, it's them. And the cop's like, put them on speaker. He puts it on speaker, and he's like, just saying wild stuff, like super demonic stuff that doesn't make any sense. They said that they were here to kill the Antichrist because I had 3 6s on me. I mean, I used to tell people after becoming a Satanist, when I didn't want to do it anymore, I used to tell them that this was 6 protons, 6 electrons, 6 neutrons, like that carbon atom, which makes up a human being, because I was embarrassed about Satanism. But at that time, they took it to literally mean something. So it went to their head. The cop was writing this all down, so that they were admitting to it there. And that was that. I remember buying a case of beer, and I was going to drink it. And I mean, I was at the hospital for some time, but this leads me to where I accepted Christ, where I was going to drink the beer. And I thought, you know what? I'm actually alive because of this God that I talked to. Whoever this was, when I said, if there's a God at all, please save me because I'm about to die. That's who intervened. Like, that's the person. And immediately, for some reason, I could have thought of any God. There was lots. I've learned about many gods, many deities, many beings, mythological gods that people worship. But I knew within my heart that it was Jesus Christ. Saw, the cross. I knew it was Jesus. And I just dropped to my knees and I just said, thank you, Lord, for saving me. I'm sorry for my sins. I just remember asking for forgiveness. And I'm like, I really want to be a better person. I almost died there. Thank you for saving me. And I owe my life to you. And from that point on, I became a Christian. I went to church the very next week on Sunday. And a lot of things happened after that happened. But at that point in time, June the 3rd, 2006, I became a Christian. And the reason why they had come to try and kill me was because on June 6th would have been, June is the 6th month, the 6th day, 2006. So they thought if they killed the Antichrist before 666, that they would stop Armageddon or something, like just wild stuff. It was in the newspaper too, the Star Phoenix newspaper in Saskatoon. So, I mean, people read this stuff, like, but it just blows my mind. So, I mean, they were there to end me, whether it was, I'm really thinking it was a demonic influence that tried to do that because they knew I was separated from God. They knew I didn't believe in Jesus, but they also knew that I stopped working for them, that I stopped spreading the message of Satan, that I stopped cursing people and talking to them. So I'm thinking they chose, that's when they wanted to end me, because my condemnation was set. It was a for sure thing that if I died, I would go to hell. I would not be in heaven. I would not be with Jesus. And looking back at that, I'm just so glad that he saved me from that.
Yeah, your story is insane, and it's so fast. Like it kind of seems to come out of nowhere. And then, like you said, you called out to a God that you didn't know, and you're like, if there's a God, save me. And you said at that moment, that's when you were able to, things actually started to turn in your favor. And afterwards, you didn't know why, but you're like, it's Jesus.
Yeah, I just knew in my heart. I don't know why till now. I mean, there's something supernatural about that. He showed up, and I just knew it was him. I just knew. I can't explain it.
Can you talk a little bit more about the following weeks? Because so far we talked about you being involved in witchcraft and very dark witchcraft, talking to demons, and then afterwards, even though you rejected that, you were still very much into hedonism and completely opposite of what the Bible would call you to do. And now this happened. You say God saved your life. How did your lifestyle, how did your worldview change after this dramatic event?
So the apartment that Mike's dad was in, it was right across the hall, and we were one level up. So we were on the third floor, they were on the second floor. And Mike had a sister named Rachel. I knew Rachel was a Christian. I knew Steve was a Christian, but I knew Rachel was kind of more of a spiritual person because she was involved in the church. She always talked about it. Um, it would annoy Mike and me a lot of the time when we went over for dinner. She would always pray and then talk about Jesus. So I knew that I needed to talk to her about what I was going through at that time. So she suggested that I go to this church, which was Faith Alive Church, Faith Alive Family Church in Saskatoon. And I went there on Sunday and I started listening and hearing about the Word of God. And I remember the pastor saying that the Word of God is the sword. It is your spiritual weapon to fight against the enemy. That the Word of God has so much power. And that stuck with me because later that night, I was reading 2 Samuel in the Bible. I even remember the chapter, and I had this foam bed that I found in the dumpster. I still didn't have a lot of money. Still was kind of poor, but we maintained rent, and that's the best we could do. So I found this bed. It was a foam bed, completely made out of foam. So it was kind of like a mattress, but it folds back up into a couch, so you can just sit on it. And that's what I was lying down on. And when I was reading 2 Samuel, I felt this buzzing vibration in the middle of my back, like kind of near my stomach, and it just buzzed again. And I'm like, okay. And all the hairs on my neck and arms were standing up. And I tried to ignore it. I was like, that's weird. Maybe it's just a twitch in my back. And then it got even stronger. And then uh, I got up, I looked underneath it, and I was looking through this foam bed, like trying to see if there's like a vibrating mechanism. Maybe it was a massage couch or a massage bed, and there was nothing in it. It was completely made out of foam, and boom, boom, boom. That was my door. Somebody was hitting it so hard. And that's when I was like kind of frozen in fear a little bit. Because at that point, I didn't really know that demons would be back. I wasn't thinking that at that time. I thought maybe Lloyd and Jermaine had broken in because they weren't in jail. And then I looked at I had a closet there, and there was like a mop with no handle on it, just the metal part. And I grabbed that, and I was just thinking how I'm going to fight them with this thing. Because Lloyd was bigger, way bigger. I couldn't fight him, probably not. I wasn't that skilled. I wasn't an MMA fighter yet. That comes later. uh, I remember another bang, bang. And I'm like, Mike, Mike. And I'm yelling to Mike because I'm thinking maybe it was Mike. Maybe it's not someone breaking in. Maybe it's Mike. Heard him get off his bed springs, so I could hear the bed springs sound, and then him walk over to his door. And then right when it went bam, bam, it would always do it in threes. So I knew on the third one I would get it, whoever it is, if it's a person, whatever. So I could kind of hear Mike, so I knew it kind of wasn't him. So I knew whoever this was, it was an enemy, and this is it. So on the third one, I went, and I went to stab it or stick it with the stick because it had a long metal point, and there was nothing there. And I looked down the hallway, looked towards Mike's place, nothing there. And that's when Mike was like walking to his door. He opens the door, and I'm like, hey, somebody's in our house, man. Just a second. I went and grabbed another stick that I had, and I passed it to him over the wall, and he grabbed it, and he's like, I'm like, are you ready? And he's like, okay, let's go. So we went into the living room. There's nothing. The door is still locked to our room. I found that out later, actually. But the the uh, the patio door is still locked. The screen's open, but we always lock that part. There's nothing there. It's not a big apartment. It's really small. So Mike's kind of taking note of this, and he's like, I'm going back to bed. He throws a stick down. He's mad at this point because I woke him up. This is like 3 o'clock in the morning. He goes into his room, and I'm like losing my mind at this point because I knew that door, like it was bending in. Like I thought somebody was like just kicking it down. Like maybe it was the cops. Like who could possibly be? Why don't they just turn the door handle? There's no one. There's no lock on it. I wasn't locked in my room. You could just open the door handle. So it was really confusing me. But that's when things started to become real to me, where I started to get kind of scared. But whenever I got scared in my life, I didn't really have a lot of fear. Like I fought a lot on the streets. I dealt with demonic beings. I didn't really have a lot of fear. That's not boasting, it's just a truth of things. But when I did get scared, I immediately started to get angry. And that's how I was feeling. Like I was so scared. I threw Mike's stick on the ground. I grabbed it, I picked it up, I threw it down. I wanted to pick it up to pretty much fight me. I know it's crazy, it sounds dumb, but I was so mad that I was like, you can physically kick my door in and out, but you can't pick up this stick. I'm like, what are you, weak? You couldn't even open the door, you had to kick it, and I'm just swearing at it. And then I'm making fun of it. I'm like, you're a bleep, bleep, bleep. And then that's when I saw this thing, which was the scariest thing I've ever seen in my entire life. And it was nothing at all. It was blacker than black can be. And it started growing. It was almost like a black hole. Now that I think of it, if you can imagine a black hole, it was like almost like it was taking over light, like light was getting sucked into it. And it was growing and growing and growing. And I remember staring at this and I'm like, this is not good. This is something spiritual. This is has nothing to do with a physical person being in here. There are demons here. There's something evil. And then my door opens and slams and opens and slams and opens and slams. And that's when I took off. I ran outside and I just stood outside. I didn't run to someone's place, but I was in my boxes again, as usual, because I was ready for bed. I was just reading the Bible in bed. And I'm outside and I'm like, what do I do? What do I do? Like, because I considered running down the street, like maybe to the police or to the hospital or something. But I figured whatever that entity, that black thing was, I figured it would get me on the way. Like maybe it would possess a car and a car would hit me in the middle of the street, or like it would possess some homeless person who would then stab me. So I thought of the only thing I could do, and I wanted to contact Rachel. So I buzzed Rachel's house. I'm glad she answered. It was 3 a.m. I mean, it was just a shot in the dark. I hoped she would answer, and she did. Because I didn't really go to Jesus at this point, which I should have. There was a point where that was going on where I did think of the word of God being your sword. But when that black thing happened, I'm like, how do I fight this with a word? But at that time, I knew practically nothing about Christianity. So I buzzed Rachel. She answered the door. I told her that there was something in my apartment, and she said, let's pray. So she prayed this prayer, and it was something I never really heard before. What she was doing was she was going into spiritual warfare. And I didn't know Christians did that, and something I looked into later and love doing a lot more often now. But she started like binding demons in Jesus' name, casting them to his feet, putting a hedge of protection around me, and blessing the room, just all sorts of things that I didn't know about. And a sense of peace eventually came over me, which I now recognize as the Holy Spirit. And I just felt so calm, so at peace. And I was so peaceful that I had confidence enough just to go right back to my room. I was like, she prayed for me. The Lord heard me. He is real. So I trust in him. And I went back to my room and just went to sleep, to be honest. I mean, there's nothing else I could have done. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. No one's awake, no one to talk to. So I just went into that foam bed, started reading. I remember reading a little bit more and asking the Lord to help me sleep. And then I went to sleep. And that was my first week after becoming a Christian.
So that was a week after the other incident?
Yeah. When I accepted the Lord and those people, two people tried to kill me. Yeah, that was on June 3rd, 2006. And then this was the next Sunday. So Monday morning at 3 in the morning. So the very next week.
So quite an intense week, to say the
Oh yeah.
least.
Yep.
Uh, and I can't help but to think the same thing that you said before. The witchcraft you were involved in was the conduit through which they were able to, get to you. But man, that's such an intense week. I don't even have words. I don't know how to react to that story. But what happened with you afterwards? Like, how did that change your life?
Um, well, I mean, I'm not really sure either why, like if there was a door left open or anything, but God has used that experience in my Christian walk from time to time when I've fallen away here and there. I mean, it's happened a couple times. Like I'll never stop believing in the Lord. I've been through too much. I've seen too much evil. I've seen too much of God's goodness, of what He has done for me in my life, and that's a part of the reason why when I tell my testimony, I left that part out of my first part of the testimony on my channel, and I made a separate video for it because if you haven't been through these things, especially in witchcraft or in spiritual things, and you've never seen these things, I'll be honest, it's hard to believe. It's not like you're going to get someone to just take your word for it. But I know that I know that I know that it happens. So I'm confident to share that. And it's just something that the Lord, I think, allowed at that time just to show me that, yeah, it was all real. You have picked the right side. And these things are not happy about it. That's kind of what I got from that. So like there'll never be somebody to tell me, oh, the Bible isn't real because of X, Y, and Z, or this history is not true, or it was made by man. No, because of what I've been through, I always look back to that. So if I ever have a struggle with faith, I'll always remember that. And there's no explanation for it. What happened is what happened, and I'll never forget it. So I'm thankful that the Lord allowed that, even though it was very frightening. But He did it for a reason, and that's just something I learned from that. So that's September. So this was in June still. So a couple months later, that's when I joined Bible college. I didn't join it to become a pastor or preacher or teacher or get a doctorate or anything. I just didn't know about God. I didn't know about Christianity. So that's where I thought I could learn about God. I mean, I was reading the Bible, but I didn't know how a Christian was supposed to live their life. Um, so most of my teaching came from there, from Bible college, and it really showed me the effect of God on the demonic when I went on my first mission trip, which was a couple of months into my Bible college days.
Yeah, we'll talk about your mission trip later. But for now, I want to give you the opportunity to talk to people that might be interested or involved in Wicca, in witchcraft, in the occult. Having lived everything that you lived, if you could speak to them and tell them a message, what would you say?
Whatever it is, your draw to the occult and into witchcraft is not just you wanting it. There's a big part of demons and the demonic side of nature that is slowly guiding you into it. And the reason they're trying to get you into it is because they want to separate you from God. They want you to not look into Jesus. They they want to keep you as far away from being a believer in Christ as possible. But then they will try their best to end you after that. So it's a very dangerous thing. You might see that your spells are working. Of course, they work. I've been there. I've done that. Um, you might have problems with drugs. You might have problems with addictions, and you might have problems with pornography, lust, all sorts of things. At least that's what I found myself gravitating to when I was getting into the occult. And as I got deeper into these things became stronger and stronger and stronger in my life. And they will get to a point where you are condemned. You're not a believer in Jesus. You have no safety. And they know that. And if you continue on this path, you will be damned for eternity. And when I say that I'm obsessed with immortality, it's still true to this day. But I know that I have it because I believe in Jesus Christ. Um, he came as a sacrifice and died for us for our sins, taking the place of us on the cross. We're deserving of it. We broke the law of God. We're unrighteous beings when sin entered the world. And you just need to accept Christ. If you're even curious as an atheist, just give him a try. Just call out to him and ask him to show you that he is real, and he won't let you down. I'm confident in that. So if you ask, he will show you, and he wants to because he loves you. Unlike the occult and unlike demons, they hate humanity. They hate every single one of us. They might try and get you to believe that you're their friend, they're your friends, or that they love you, or that you're a chosen person. But these are simple lies that they tell everyone. At least they told me that. So don't buy into their games. Don't buy into their lies. That's all they do. They might feed you a little truth here and there, especially if you're into tarot, but that just keeps you coming back for more. They don't actually tell you the true truth of things. They'll give you a little nugget of truth and a little another seed until you keep following those seeds and you get pulled further and further into their hands. And I just want you to know that if you recognize this, at least if you hear me say this to you, this is your wake-up call for that, because don't say the Lord hasn't warned you, because he loves you and he wants you into his kingdom. So seek him and seek him alone.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Almost False podcast. As Christian alluded to, there's another part of his testimony after he became a follower of Christ. It's available on Locals, and it's just as wild, if not more than this one. So if that sounds interesting, consider joining and becoming a sponsor of the show. Our supporters are the ones who allow us to keep this going and to keep up the quality that you've come to expect from this channel. There's so much time, effort, and money that goes into every single one of these interviews, and I would not be able to do it without you guys. So if you want to go check out Locals, the link is in the description. Thanks for sticking around. Have a good day. Stay blessed.